Well, good morning, fam. It is another great morning here. This is another episode of Unpublic, and today I am doing another office hours on the Achievement Gospels. Um, it's a slow start to the morning, but glad to be here with you all this morning. As always, I'm going to put something into the in the chat here to let everybody know we are here. And we are ready to rock and to roll on a new discussion. If you have any thoughts, concerns, contributions, please put it into the chats today. Again, as I said, we're talking about the Achievement Gospels, and I think it'll become clear later exactly what I mean by the Achievement Gospels, but let's just jump right in. You guys know that I like to frame things out a little bit so that I can organize my thoughts about what we're talking about this morning, but feel free to, good morning, Natalie. I see you jumping in there. Toya, good morning. I see other folks coming in. As you come in, I want some participation this morning because I'm going to need your help. I'm going to need your help in talking about, in making the argument that I want to make. I don't have it fully as solid as I want it to be. And I feel like if I kind of crowdsource some resources and I crowdsource some ideas from you all, it'll help me round this out, and eventually I'll write something about this. So here's the setup in the frame for what I'm calling the Achievement Gospel. So every day there are 380,000 babies born. That's each day. That's 385,000 new stories that will unfold over the period of many years. God willing, most of these stories will have some form of a happy ending, but we know that many will not. The prison and welfare systems are full of people who were once babies. There were once these people that were held in someone's hands, and that person looking at them believed that they had all the potential in the world and wouldn't be able to predict that their story would end up either in prison, welfare, economic exile, or outside the mainstream of American living. The victims of human rights abuses and suffocating poverty, they were once newborns, full of all of God's promise. Something happens between the day that they're born, the first day of their life, and the day when they end up in these really bad systems, or maybe they end up in good systems. Something happens in between that time. They're not born to be marginalized. They're not born to be lesser than or lower on anybody's caste system. And I truly believe this, that each child, no matter where they're born, no matter what their location, is born with the same unsurpassable worth that God grants all of his creations. But the way that we have structured the world is brutal and savage and puts each of those babies into different places and categories that create trajectories for their lives, trajectories that God did not intend. If they are lucky, they are born with enough basic resources, shelter, food, and care. And educational care is part of that. So we'll talk about that a little bit today as preparation for their learning years, because the learning years are where all the neurons start firing and all the magic starts happening that sets them up for good lives, mediocre lives, okay lives, or lives in economic, social, political, and spiritual exile. They are doubly lucky if they have a knowledgeable, dedicated, and no-nonsense guardian in their life. That's either a parent or a aunt, an uncle, a cousin, a grandparent, someone who is taking on the job of ruthlessly defending them against the way that we have structured the world, against all the elements of the weather, and provides them with shelter, food, protection, intellectual protection as part of that. So here's the central problem that I see that calls for this discussion that we have today. And I'm going to have two concepts, and they're going to be at odds with each other. I'm going to talk about it a little bit here. The central problem that I see is that we have all these negative statistics. Let's just stick with Black children for now. We could talk about other marginalized children, but if we're talking about Black children, statistically speaking, Black children, when they are born in this country, have many things that are already in place that are going against them, statistically speaking. And I don't want to go through all the statistics, but in education, we know the statistics, or at least we know the outcomes. And we know they're poor, right? That the outcomes are poor. And once you've accepted that, we all have, it's a universal truth that there's this thing called the achievement gap that we call it the achievement gap. It's in dispute what we should call it, but I'm just going to call it the achievement gap for purposes of this conversation. You have to ask yourself the simplest basic question: why is that? Okay, I understand that there is a gap between the outcomes, especially on test scores, between Black and white students. There's a gap in other things too, like graduation, but not as much of a gap. And for purposes of this conversation and in preparation, I can only think of three answers to why there is this gap. So the first answer is the root of the problem is inherent, immutable, and or genetic in Black people. And that's why there's that gap. The second answer is the root of the problem is environmental and systemic. It's the outside world, it's external things. And the third answer, simple as I can make it, is that the root of the problem is a mix of inherent and immutable things and external environmental factors. I want to strike that third answer for a second, but here's my answer to those three answers. If you say that number one is the problem, that the reason that we have a gap is because there is something inherently or immutably wrong with Black people, it's in the discussion. It's lights out. We have nothing else to talk about, right? So you can blame low school performance on Black culture, Black parenting, Black people, IQ. We'll talk about Charles Murray just a little bit later, but you can blame it on the bell curve. You can blame it on a lot of things, but if that's your answer to the question, let's just say we have no fellowship. So let's just break with that and dispense with the discussion. The second answer is if you answer that the problem is environmental and systemic, I would probably mostly agree, and I would need you to get way more specific quickly about what parts of the system. Like, what are the inputs from the system that go wrong specifically for Black children? If you say the third one, that it's a mix between the two, I'll think that you're trying to hedge your bet and you're lukewarm, so therefore God spit you out, and no purpose for us here. So I want to talk today about the achievement gospels, but before we get there, I have to talk about the bad news. And I just want to say achievement gospels. I keep saying that. Gospel, very simply translated, only means good news. And I feel like we need some good news about achievement, because if we constantly talk about the achievement gap and how to fix the achievement gap and how to fill the gap, whatever, we're stuck in the bad news and we never get to the good news. And I believe that there's cause to be excited about the good news on achievement once you've spent so much time in the bad news. But first, let's start with the bad news. I said earlier I was going to introduce two concepts. So I've already introduced the achievement gospels as one concept. The mirror opposite to me of the achievement gospels is achievement essentialism. And let me just put this out there and see if it resonates in your ear, if you hear the same thing. So when I hear people say, all standardized tests tell us is the race and income level of a child's parents. Or when I hear people say or assume when they're told that there are low test scores for Black and brown students, and they say, well, they failed those tests because those tests are racially biased. In my ears, what I hear behind that statement is a disbelief that a group of people could have passed those tests and done better on those tests. And for reasons on the right, you might say it's because of all the things that the right likes to say about, Black culture, Black families, whatever. They might blame that. And on the left, they'll blame, well, because they've been victims of of history, victims of the world. But nowhere in that will you hear the possibility that the kids could have passed those tests. No one will say, well, yeah, standardized tests can tell us a lot of things. Yeah, maybe they correlate with race and income, poverty. Okay. But that's not the end of the story, right? Like, clearly, you don't walk into a classroom and say, tell me your mom's education, tell me how much money you guys make. Okay, thank you. Now that I have the answer that you've told me those two things, it's not possible for you guys to pass any of these tests, to be taught, to learn. Your brains aren't elastic. You're doomed, right? So educational or academic essentialism, in my mind, basically says that there is something that you cannot overcome that is immutable to the person, that is inherent in them, either their condition or their demography. One of those two things has doomed you. And that's a problem. It's not a problem when bigoted people outside of school systems think that to themselves while they're sitting on their porch and thinking about the world deeply. It is a problem if that creeps into the mindset of educators and people who we task with teaching children, regardless of where they come from, regardless of what they know. I'm going to need some of my main folks here, Toya, Michelle Johnson, others. Check me if I say something where you think that the claim needs to be better substantiated or off the rails or whatnot, or add to this, because I know you guys have a lot to say about these claims that I make. So my main problem with academic essentialism is that within the claims that it makes, the belief that academic failure in students is due to their demography or their conditions, I just don't believe that that's true. I believe that it's a common thing to say and to believe, to explain away the poor performance that the system has with racially and economically marginalized outgroups, but I don't believe that it's the truth. Missing from those claims is any strong, valid critique of the quality of the teaching that the students have received. So you've almost set up a situation where it doesn't matter what the quality of the teaching is, because the kids are inherently unable to learn because of their demography. That's essentialism. It's the idea that something inherent or immutable in the child dooms them to low performance regardless of what you do for them. And it's that regardless of what you do for them that really is problematic to me, because if that's literally what you believe, you should quit right now. It's number one, it's not true, but just two, if you really believe that, why do that every day? Why become a person who's trying to fight against a fight that seems unwinnable because you've already told yourself, in your belief system, that it's not possible. This to me creates a group of unteachables. It's a caste system. It's a system within education that becomes a caste. And then you start having different levels of expectation for different people. One level of people you expect to go off and lead the world. You expect to prepare them to go off and to be great leaders and to own all of society. Another group of people you send off to do reasonably well, but probably are going to work for the masters of the universe, but they'll have good jobs with the masters of the universe. And then there's this other caste group who are further down, who you consider to be like the unteachables. And I'm thinking of that in the same way that you think about the untouchables in some other societies that have a caste system. You have literally created in your mind a group of people who you don't expect anything good to happen for. And you have marginalized them to the point of, I'll say it's really immoral, the place that you have put them. If there's no hope for them to learn, to gain, to become educated people, to get jobs, to get houses or whatnot, you've played a bad part in the system. There's something that in 2013, I want to see if I can find this really quick. Something really changed my mind about all of this in 2013. Here it is. Some of you have heard me or have seen me show this before. I'm going to put it up on the screen because it really did kind of change my thinking. Well, let me do this. Let me change the screen that I'm sharing here. So in 2013, there was a story in Education Week that I couldn't explain. Here it is. Black-white gap widens faster for high achievers. And by high achievers, I mean high achieving Black people. First paragraph here, new research into what is commonly called the Black-white achievement gap suggests that the students who lose the most ground academically in U.S. public schools may be the brightest African Americans. So help me make this make sense. We talk all the time about how the achievement gap starts before kids get to school. They're already behind. They know fewer words. They are lesser prepared, and it's kind of out of our hands. They come to us already in poor condition. If that's true, fine, but why would it be like, so the second paragraph here, as Black students move through elementary and middle school, these studies show the test score gaps that separate them from their better performing white counterparts grow faster among the most able students and the most slowly for those who start out with below average academic skills. So the gap widens less for the kids that are behind. It widens more for the kids who come to school. That's stunning to me. It was stunning to me when I thought about it years ago. I had a Head Start teacher once say to me, "We send your school system prepared and ready kids all the time, and you guys squander like their results by the time they're in second or third grade." It changed my frame. How could it be that the most prepared students who actually come to school are the ones that lose the most ground the quickest? That actually for me meant that we have to consider that there's something about the system that is wrong and not just something about the students that is wrong. So that leads me to believe, well, let me back up just a little bit too and say this. If that's true, and we're achievement essentialist, and we believe that it's still the kids' fault, it's not the system's fault, there are material consequences to that. One of which I just want to call out real quick here, because it goes to what happens when people don't believe that you can actually teach and educate Black children, so there's no need to do anything. There's no need for help. There's no need for you to put more effort into teaching them. Let me see if I can find it here. Here it is. So this was a study out of Baylor. I want to say, how old is this? This is 2013 also. This study from Baylor University said that that policymakers are more likely to pass legislation to change for education reform, to change things, if they believe that it's going to help white students, not Black students. So, for instance, the first paragraph here says, state policymakers' attention to teacher quality, an issue in education research shows is essential to improving schooling outcomes for racial minorities, is highly responsive to low graduation rates among white students, but not to low graduating Black students. The findings are evidence that the persistent achievement gap between white and Black students has distinctively political foundations, the researchers say. They basically say in this study that if legislators believe that a reform is going to be helpful for helping underperforming white students, it'll pass, much more likely to pass than if they believe that the reform is meant to help and aid Black students. Get your mind around that. Make that make sense for me, for you. Why would it make a difference who a reform is going to help for you to pass it? I just put this link down into the comments there for you so that you all can take a look at the study yourself. With all these things, I'm willing to be challenged. I'm willing for anyone to say, well, I think you're reading too much into this or that and the other, but I really don't think so. And some of these thoughts I've come across for a long time. I have been thinking about this really insulting kind of way that educators talk about Black and brown children as if they're not, like they can't be educated, like there's too many barriers. Their parents, their poverty, we're not fully funded, the lack of this, all the type of things I never really hear anybody say about white children as on the whole. And let's not fool ourselves. It's not because all white children come from college educated households with parents that are earning a lot, right? Like I think we put a little bit too much into that basket sometimes too. I want to give an example. So let me share my screen yet again. I'm a screen sharing fool today because I got multiple things to show you all. So I'm going to put this up here. So Marva Collins is somebody who comes up oftentimes when we talk about Black educational lore, like folklore amongst Black education all-stars. She stands out. Person in the 70s and into the 80s who really kind of rocked the world by starting a school outside of the Chicago public school system because she wanted to she wanted to have all the freedom she needed just to teach kids, just to teach them wherever they were coming from, whatever they were coming from. She wanted to set up a situation where they would be in a classroom with someone who had very high standards for them, and therefore she wanted to kind of upset the apple cart a little bit. Something in preparing for this show that I didn't know that comes up in this 60 Minutes broadcast about her from 1995 was that Charles Murray, the author of The Bell Curve, had he covers Marva Collins in his book, The Bell Curve. Now, they say somewhere, it's like somewhere page 180 or 181 or 182, somewhere in the middle of all of that. He says that Charles Murray's response to Marva Collins was, it was a bunch of magic and mysticism, that Black kids from this class and from this race, IQ-wise, would not be able to perform what she was saying that they could perform. So he basically took to task the whole Marva Collins story. And it's part of the academic essentialism. When you are so hung up on the belief that kids are so biologically, genetically, economically somehow inferior, and you can't even get your mind around the fact that they might not be any of those things, you just can't believe that they would perform well. And I believe that that attitude and that thinking is deeply embedded in the education establishment, whether we like it or not. As much anti-racist training as people are taking, and as much equity and DEI and all those type of trainings that people are doing in professional development, it is still deeply embedded within the belief system of American public education that there is a group of children that just can't learn no matter what you do for them. And I believe this whether people want to admit it or not. But what I want to do now is I want to show this quick clip from 1995 with Marva Collins, the kids in her classroom, and just listen for what's going on with the kids in this.
I like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, and I like Charlotte Bronte, Jane Eyre.
So what happened to those 34 students we met at Westside Prep? Charles Murray says by implication that their apparent intelligence and promise was a fraud, that what we saw was just too good to be true. Or was it? We traced 33 of the 34 and flew a group of them back to Chicago, back to Westside Prep's new location for a reunion of sorts.
Aren't you pretty?
To see if Charles Murray's allegations in the Bell Curve are true, to see whether or not these young men and women lived up to Marva's claims. Christopher Stubblefield,
We learned to read hard work.
the 8-year-old with a big voice, is now at university in Texas. And Erica McCoy Pace graduated last spring from Norfolk State University. When you saw her last, she was listing her favorite authors.
Emerson, Henry David Thoreau.
And what about the rest of our class of 79?
Michael Anderson, Taylor. Terry Holmes, owner-operator of transportation company.
Latanya Singleton, preschool teacher.
James Lowe, Staff Sergeant, United States Air Force.
Sabrina Yates, sixth grade teacher.
Rysel Winters, law student.
Louis Johnson, Operations Manager.
Xavier Jones, teacher, criminal justice major.
Craig Brunner, clerk for the State's Attorney's Office.
I remember I had said in front of all my classmates here that I want to become an attorney. And it's funny, I'm actually in law school and I graduate next year. And Ms. Carlos told me, oh yes, you can do it. You can do whatever you want to do. It's possible. And I'm living proof it is possible.
A number of you are teachers. Were you inspired by her to become teachers?
Definitely. She just gave so much to me personally in terms of always being reassuring. I mean, just the small things, like she would grab my face and say, pretty girl.
Yeah. Honey, you're brilliant.
That's right.
Especially Craig. She would take his head and raise it up. Speak up, honey, you're brilliant.
That's right.
And, you know, after someone telling you that every day, 5 days a week, for 3 or 4 years, you know, that's in you. That becomes a part of you. You are brilliant, honey.
And then we were like doing Shakespeare. We put on the plays and we had to play.
But Charles Murray stated that claims of long-term academic achievement would typically fade as these children grow up.
Sagacious means what? Means you're very what? Right.
The words that we learned, it was nice because when we left and we heard someone talking, using a word, we knew what that word meant. And now in school, a lot of times we get the reading list on the course outline. I read most of the books on there. You know, it's like, oh yeah, I read that, or the teacher will be talking about something. And I'm like, oh yeah, I read that book. All the students may feel like this shit.
And gather, what is it?
Right here.
Do you use your notes, your West Side Prep notes on Hamlet to write a paper when?
I used it in high school, and I also used it in an English lit class when I was in college. And looking back at my handwriting, I was like, wow, you know. And I was like, these are good notes.
Murray also raised questions about Marva's claims that 5 and 10-year-olds who'd been labeled unteachable were capable of reading Chaucer and Shakespeare. Well, Michael Anderson was said to have a learning disability when he entered Marva's school at age 9.
I had a client just a couple months ago, brought up Shakespeare out of nowhere. And we sat after having coffee for 3 hours. You know, well, where did you learn Shakespeare? 4th grade. I knocked him off his feet. He couldn't believe it. 4th grade.
And there is Erica, who was considered a hopeless case at age 6.
Basically, I was told that I was borderline retarded, that I would never read. So I was basically written off.
I was supposed to be put back a couple of grades, but I wasn't when I came to Miss Collins.
When we saw Craig Brunner in 1979, he was reading his essay about Cleopatra.
Very, very long ago, there was a queen called...
What was the secret of her success or motivation or what?
The confidence, how you have a brain, you can do it on your own. You don't have to wait for anybody.
She killed herself with a poisonous snake.
So there you go. I know that was kind of a long clip, but I wanted to play the whole thing. I didn't know when I watched this last night, I didn't know where to stop it because it's about 7 or 8 minutes long, the entire clip, and I'll put it into the comments for you all to watch later. But it's a perfect example of what was going on in that conversation were two different things. They were two competing ideas. He mentioned Charles Murray more than once, a couple of times. And Charles Murray was a defender of the academic essentialist position, which is there are immutable characteristics, IQ being one of them, of which will permanently put people put black folks and brown folks behind white folks, because in his mind, that's the natural order of intelligence within the world. And the competing idea there was the Marva Collins of, we've never believed that. That has never been like our history. That is what white people have always believed about black people and black children, but that has never been what we have believed about ourselves. And in our own lineage and our own history, we have been defenders of the achievement gospels, right? And our main opponent always has been the Charles Murrays of the world. Today, it's a little bit more sophisticated than that. But let me say, this is what I think is the big fight in education right now. This is the yin and the yang, the evil and the good, the black and the white, is those who are academic essentialists and those who are, let me change that, achievement essentialists, and those who are believers in the achievement gospels, which has carried Black people through many dark nights. On the one side in education, you have people like Charles Murray, Diane Ravitch, Gary Rubenstein, people on Twitter and in Facebook and in books and in conferences and in speeches who consistently hold up the achievement essentialist position. We put up sometimes schools that we think are doing really well with kids of color. This is why I mentioned Gary Rubenstein. He sees himself as a permanent skeptic that miracle schools exist, like the Marva Collins story. So in some ways, he's just like Charles Murray. Even though politically they're on the right and the left, they share the exact same skepticism about schools that are miracle schools and can get things done with kids that no one else can. So now for the good side. We've talked about the dark side for half an hour now. Let's talk about the achievement gospels and what that means to me. So first of all, I want to put it out to you all watching, just a question. Do you have any resources, any books or authors or speakers that you have read that have helped you completely disown or dislodge the idea that our kids can't learn because of their condition or because of their demography? Who have been the authors, the writers, the speakers, the scholars? What scholarship, what have you read or taken in that has made you a believer in young people? Young people that other people don't believe in. Please put them in the comment section, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to assemble these as a list that will make up. What I'm basically asking you to do is help me create the achievement gospels. I want to tell you about a couple that have changed my way of thinking. One is Mark Gaskins. Baba Asa Hilliard was an amazing contribution to defeating the belief gap, what I call the belief gap. So one book is called Self-Taught, African American Education in Slavery and Freedom. It's by Heather Andrea Williams. That book did a lot to help me understand that Black folks Black people in the United States have never fallen victim to essentialism. As a matter of fact, right after slavery, when people were free, the first things that people of all ages, Black people of all ages, wanted to do was learn, and that they knew that they could. And they set up schools under trees. They set up schools in church basements, in the houses of kind people, and they set about increasing their own literacy for years, even though they were coming out of some of the most dire circumstances, coming out of slavery, coming out of extreme poverty, not the type of poverty that we talk about today, but a different form of poverty. But there was always this inclination to learn. There was never an idea that they couldn't. There was always an inclination to become literate, to understand words, to start understanding what the words were hiding from them when they were prevented from reading. So that, for me, actually becomes like a very strong achievement gospel motivation. What would put it in you that you could really learn when you have just come out of slavery? So her book, again, it's Self-Taught, African American Education in Slavery and Freedom, is one. Another book is more recent. So like a year or two, and not everybody loved this book, but there's a book called Making Kids Cleverer, a manifesto for closing the advantage gap by David Didow. That book actually is it's not based on Black history. It's a total pedagogical book of the moment for today, written by a white guy who to me he cuts through a lot of the essentialism nonsense. Of course, there are kids that come to school differently abled and differently kind of situated or whatnot. And his book basically says, and there are still strategies to help them learn. There's also, there's this book, What Great Teachers Do Differently. And there's 14 different things in this book that that Todd Whitaker, the author, says, again, I'm going to hold it up, that the author says could be done differently. There's also The Brilliance of Black Children in Mathematics. I'm going to lift this up so that you guys can see it closely here. It's kind of a thick book, but also, again, this is one of those achievement belief gap killing books. And someone I'm going to talk about a little bit more in a couple of seconds here, who I think actually, if there's such thing as the achievement gospels, there would have to be a book of Karen. Karen Chenoweth is somebody that that I read years ago, work that she was doing through dispelling the myth. And she has a book, It's Being Done, which I think is an important book because when you don't believe that something can happen and then someone comes to you and says, hey, the good news is it's actually happening. It's being done. The thing that you don't think can happen, like educating Black children or marginalized children or children out of poverty or brown children, hey, it's being done. I can't think of a better gospel, a better bit of good news than, hey, it's being done. And let me show you how it's being done, which becomes the second book. Because with Karen's book, It's Being Done, one of the critiques of that book is that it gave many broad strokes around what schools were doing to help kids who others thought couldn't learn, what they were doing, you know, things like having high expectations. But people read the book and said, wasn't concrete enough. We want more kind of concrete things that we could use. Karen Chenoweth has studied schools that are beating the odds, or maybe if that's not the right language to use, schools that are getting the job done with children that others believe that can't learn. So she's not just saying it, but she's kind of studying it. And then her next book, in response to the critique from the first one, is how it's being done. So like you're starting to have fewer and fewer excuses for not believing that young people can learn. So those are some of the books I would add to that I would add to the Achievement Gospels. I noticed a couple of you put some in here. So the Miseducation of the Negro, Tanya, thank you very much for that one. I would expect you to also say education in the South, Black education in the South. So Joe Nathan has put Alternative Public Schools, Harvard Education Review, Kenneth Clark. So Kenneth Clark is the doctor who him and his wife performed the famous doll tests in Brown versus Board of Education's The Case. So he was one of the social scientists that offered the idea that that there's an inherent bias against Black children, that they learn early, that all children learn early, and that, you know, integration might be helpful for that. In 1968, he wrote a piece somewhat out of frustration that integration had not been the cure-all that people thought it would be. And in that piece that he wrote in the Harvard Education Review called Alternative Public Schools, if you want a copy of this, let me know. Shoot me a message and I will get you one because I have it online. He wrote basically that there needs to be all these kind of new schools so that we could create new possibilities to be run by community groups, universities, labor groups, just a wide variety of new players and new actors in education. Toya also added The Lost Education of Horace Tate to the mix, and a Black Hands book club has worked on that book together, and I think that's a good one to add. So let me just kind of add a quick timeline to what I think are the Achievement Gospels, because I don't want it to sound like something I made up today, something that I'm thinking about now, because there's history to this. So pre-civil rights era, Black schools were on the achievement gospel side of things, not the essential side of things. Black educators were not saying to Black communities and Black people, because you are poor and because you have Black skin, you are not able to learn. Vanessa Siddal Walker is a person to add to the achievement gospels. Her scholarship details very clearly how Black educators prior to the civil rights movement, prior to Brown versus Board of Education, really thought in no uncertain terms that not only could the kids learn, that they had to, that it was germane to life, that it was part of their survival, and they had to learn. So they figured out the ways to make it happen. And little conversation is had about this, but all of the numbers were trending the right direction prior to Brown. So prior to Brown, black educators were closing all the gaps, including the graduation gap between black and white students. And it was because, one, they believed that it could happen and that it could be done. They weren't, wrapped up in this idea that poor black kids are unteachable. So in 1966, the Coleman Report comes out, very famous report from sociologist James Coleman. And in that report, there was this line that basically said schools can have very little impact on students in poverty. And it's something that James Coleman later came to revise or reverse himself on. But at least in 1966, that's what he said. And it spurred a lot of research and scholarship around, well, is that true? Is it true that schools can have no effect? And out of that, like asking the question of it, came Ron Edmonds. So Ron Edmonds in the 1970s, created something called effective schools, and it became a movement, the effective schools movement. He started with this idea. Here's a quote from him: "All students are eminently educable." I don't know why people use words like that, but he just basically says all students can be educated. We can, whenever, wherever we choose, successfully teach all children whose schooling is of interest to us. We already know more than we need to know to do this. Whether we do it or not must finally depend on how we feel about the fact that we have not done it so far. How we feel about the fact of not having done something, not teaching kids, knowing that we could if we wanted to. Kind of a stunning indictment, but that was in the 1970s. His vision for effective schools, when you get to the how, okay, how can this be done? A safe and orderly environment, high expectations for student success, a principal who provides instructional leadership and communicates the mission of the school to staff, students, and parents, which I think is very important, a clear and focused mission. And I have called this in the past a coherent educational philosophy. You should be able to know what the educational philosophy of a school is. And if you visit as many schools as I have, you come into many of them and understand that they don't have a clear educational philosophy at all. The opportunity to learn and a large amount of student time on task and frequent monitoring of student process. So those are some of the things that that went into the effective schools movement. If you have worked in education for any amount of time, I am sure that you have encountered this in one of the schools that you have worked in. I'm not saying that it has worked perfectly, but I'm saying that at different points in time, different elements of the effective school kind of ethos has made a difference in kids' life, proving that it's not the kids that are the problem. When you make changes within a school and within a school system, it can make a difference overall. Now, I want to get back to this passing the test thing, and I want to show you another person who I think is one of the key people within the achievement gospels. Like if we were going to say that there's such thing as the achievement gospel, here's one that I think would be important. This is Barbara Sizemore on passing standardized tests.
We had success with the elementary schools.
The focus seemed, in terms of the new system, seemed to be that you'd sort of done a reversal from against standardized tests to figuring out a way to help poor black kids to pass.
Yeah, but I didn't know that when I was in DC. I learned that in Pittsburgh.
You learned what in Pittsburgh?
That you can overcome the cultural obstacles in a standardized test.
How did you, was that simply through the research that you were doing all those years?
That's correct. That's correct. That's correct. You find out, I learned this from Louis Vincent and Doris Brevard. Doris Brevard was the principal at Robert Lee Vann Elementary School in Pittsburgh, and Louis Vinson was the principal of the Beltoover. These were the two highest achieving of the three schools that I studied. This is what they did. They determined what did you need to know to learn how to read. And they taught these children how to read as fast as they could. So most of their children knew how to read by the time they left first grade. That's a tremendous asset. Because what does that mean? They're not behind. It means they're not behind. So I think Mrs. Brevard had something like 91% of her children reading at grade level in grade 2. Hello. So my thing was, okay, how you do this? And what I found out was you take as much time as you need to do it. So those kids didn't have music, didn't have art, didn't have physical ed. Teaching them reading all day long. Do you learn how to read? This is illegal. Well, you hear me? This is illegal.
Explain when you say this is illegal. What do you mean?
I mean, the state says you're supposed to teach these little cookies these
Different subjects. So how do you get around the fact that it's illegal?
They just did it. They just did it.
Oh, I love they just did it. They just did it. I've heard over time from so many educators that that were in so-called beat the odds schools, as I've talked to people, that one of the main strategies for beating the odds is dropping the rules. Like the rules that have been handed down and given. Oftentimes educators who are doing things successfully in a school are doing it with a strong principal who can fight off the central office and can keep, create a zone of like achievement that, pushes away the outside forces. And then they just get to break the rules in the building. What I love about what Barbara Sizemore here is saying is, again, I'm looking to attack achievement essentialism. I'm looking to attack the idea. And what she has just said here and what she is talking about to me is one of the best possible attacks, which is it can be done, right? Like we have to point that out. I want to keep resting not on my own belief, but on people who I believe have a reason to say what they're saying, scholars, people who study things, educators, others who I think contribute to my passion, which is to beat the belief gap. I believe the belief gap is nefarious and it's what's killing us and it's what's killing the Black mind. So I need people who prove that because I'm not the scholar who does that. Let me read you something that I've quoted many times over the years. This is from Linda Darling Hammond. She says that research in student learning gains is associated with teachers who have a strong academic background, quality preparation for teaching, certification in the field they are teaching, 3+ years experience in teaching, and mastery of the skills measured by national board certification. Now, here's the killer for me from Linda Darling Hammond, this quote. She says, taken together, these factors predict differences in student achievement more than race and parent education combined. More than race and parent education combined. The quality of the preparation of a teacher, the performance of a teacher, the certification of a teacher has more of an impact than student achievement than race and parent education combined. If we know this, how do we let people get away with blaming children, blaming their race, blaming their condition, their parents, their culture, their poverty? How do we allow educators and the education establishment to indict us for the system's failings? Again, I like to keep saying, help me make it make sense. Excuse me. So let me push on from Linda Darling Hammond to go back to Karen Chenoweth, who I think is actually like, there has to be a book of Karen in the Achievement Gospels, because I think that her life's work and what she's been doing actually gives us all hope. If you wake up any morning wondering whether or not it can be done, then Karen's your person to get over that. Like, to get over that hump and get back to the business of demanding that the systems do something because they can, right? We've been told this forever, but in Karen's recent work, I think this comes up over and over and over and over again. Let me just show you something, because I hate to like say things and not show, you know, like in writing and great writing and just in great kind of everything, you know, showing rather than telling is more important. So over at Education Trust, Katie Hayek is like one of my spirit animals. She's like one of the people a long time ago, before I was known to anybody about anything, who I was writing about. I latched on to the work that the Education Trust was doing only for one reason. They fed my need to find the evidence that we could learn, that we could be educated, that it wasn't a foredrawn conclusion that our race prevented us or our poverty prevented us. And they used to put out these PowerPoints. I can't find them anymore, but they were PowerPoints that had dispelling the myth, I think may have been the heading that they were under, but they had the actual data from actual schools that were beating the odds. I'll put this link into the comments here also. But if you go to the EdTrust page, which is kind of hard to find, so Karen and everybody else, I'm going to need y'all to get this closer to places where people can find it. You will find examples of schools that have done everything that we're talking about right now, which is focus on systems, focus on teaching and learning and instruction, focus on how they use their internal time, their staffing, their budgets, and everything else to produce better results. And there are literal kind of examples here to look at. One of them I had latched onto, and I don't know if I see it here. George Hall Elementary in Alabama, for instance, was a school where they had all the things that you would expect. They had high poverty, they had a high proportion of kids of color, specifically Black students, but they didn't let that be the end of the story. They actually dug in, did some work. There was some turnover in staff. The staff came together, I think kind of shut down the school, came together, thought through what they were going to do differently in teaching and learning and what their systems were going to look like. And they posted some pretty remarkable results as a result of their work and their efforts to make change. That never would have happened if they would have just been stuck in believing that it wasn't possible. If they had just been stuck in believing like it's a foredrawn conclusion. I mean, look at who our students are. Of course, we can't do any better. Wouldn't have changed. Charlotte Mecklenburg is another place where teachers and staff came together to think through what their systems were doing and how they were using their systems to better achievement. And over time, they did produce some pretty great results. So it can be done. So in terms of how it's being done, I just wanted to say a couple of things about that. It's in Karen's book, How It's Being Done. But teacher collaboration comes up over and over and over again. Excuse me. And this, in Karen's book, this means that teachers need time to collaborate, and they need to think very deeply about how they use their time, how they use every minute of the day, basically, but how they use teacher collaborative time. There needs to be rules of engagement amongst the teachers about how to collaborate and how to use that time. Master teachers have to participate. So the best teachers in the building have to participate with the first year teachers and the new teachers. In fact, you have to always pretend that brand new teachers, you're going to have to teach them from scratch. Is what Karen says in her book. And there needs to be goals. But there needs to be, like, the team needs to share goals. It can't be individualized teachers doing individualized things. Collaboratively as a unit, they need to have goals. And then there's just a couple other things. You've heard some of these before. I'm sure this is not new to you, but I'm going to say it again. Laser-like focus on what kids need to learn. What do the kids need to know? Will tell you what you need to teach, and will tell you whether or not it's working. Because if they're not learning those things, lots of formative assessment, data-driven instruction. And you know, a thing about data-driven instruction that Karen mentions is some people are going to recoil the moment that they hear that. The very first, it's going to take them some other place. But you have 5 teachers in a school, and teacher A, B, and C are getting one set of results with the same kids in the same subject at the same grade level, and one teacher is not. That teacher needs all the available data on that, and she needs to be able to ask those other educators. So, okay, my kids aren't getting all the star words that your kids are getting. You know, what are you doing? And using data to kind of refine practice to get the same results that someone else is. Always be improving and doing better. And then the last thing in how it's being done that I think is a really important piece is building relationships in the building amongst students, teachers, and parents, and a culture of respect. Not raising your voice at students, not constantly disciplining, not wasting a bunch of time, always disciplining and punishing. So anyways, I think we're coming to the landing spot, which is good because I'm starting to lose my voice a little bit here. I want to say that if you wanted to say what were the achievement gospels, I think these books are a good start. You all have mentioned many things within this show around authors, scholars, and other things that we should bring up. I think Joe Nathan is in the comments here. I think Joe would be someone that I should talk to him more about this. But Minneapolis was the site in the 1970s of a major demonstration project from the federal government. They were given money here locally to upset an entire balance of schools, take like an entire section of the city and try new things. Try magnet schools, open schools, free schools, schools without walls. I mentioned this stuff a lot. All of that comes out of the idea that the system can be shaken up and do something better. If you stop believing that there's even a need to do things differently, then you won't. So we've learned, at least from the 70s, there was an explosion of experiments. Not all of them worked, but experimentation is not bad if you're not getting the results that you want to get and you believe that it's possible to get the better results. I think it's incumbent on you to constantly be trying, constantly be changing, constantly be researching, because we have to beat this insidious, nefarious belief that some kids can't be educated based upon their race, their social location on the economic scale. All of that has to go away if we consider ourselves to be moral people. And believe me, educators have to always consider themselves to be moral people. So taken from Karen's books and some others, here's some thou shalts. Achievement gospels, thou shalt teach the students. Thou shalt not teach to the test. Thou shalt teach to the standards. Thou shalt have high expectations for students. Thou shalt know the stakes. Thou shalt use all data possible. Thou shalt use data to focus on individual students, not just groups of students. Thou shalt constantly re-examine what you do. Thou shalt embrace accountability. Thou shalt make decisions in the best interest of children, not adults. Use time wisely. Leverage as many resources from the community as possible. Expand the time that students have in school. Do not spend a lot of time punishing students. Establish an atmosphere of respect. Like the kids. Get the best instruction to kids that struggle the most. Principals are constantly present. Principals aren't the only leaders, though. Teachers are too. Pay attention to quality of teaching staff. Provide time for teachers to collaborate. Provide teachers time to observe each other. Think seriously about professional development. Assume that you will train all new teachers from scratch. They're not coming to you already trained. They have high quality building staff. And finally, be a nice place to work. I hope I got this all in under an hour, and I think I did. Man, listen, I'm not the smartest person in the world, but I like to read. And I like to think these things through. And I love it that there are so many people in the world who are already doing the work and have done the research for us and have done the scholarship for us. If you wanted to weave together scholarship that would tell you that many groups of kids aren't capable of teaching and learning, there would be a good number of scholars that could help you do that. I think you're a bad person if you want to do that. I think you're a bad person if that's where you want your head to go when we answer the questions about how can education be more just for all? How can it create a more just society? How can there be justice for children overall? If those are the questions that you're asking, I think you've got to come to the side of the achievement gospels, which means you have to consider the naysayers, the devil, and you have to consider the people who bring you the good news, the saints of the work, the people who tell you, not only am I going to tell you that it's possible, but I'm going to show you how. I'm going to give you the research that gives you the firm footing to believe that it can be done and that it's true. That's my final word today. This has been Office Hours with the Achievement Gospels. Hopefully you're more of a believer at the end of this show now than you were at the beginning of the show. Hopefully we can all work together to build a movement and build community around the Achievement Gospels rather than essentialism. I think we have to. If we want to keep doing the work that we do, we can't ever lose the hope and the belief. So thank you all. I'm deeply, deeply, deeply touched by the fact that there are people that will stick with me on the morning to listen to and talk about and add resources to each other about education of all things. It's so hard to get people talking about these things. So may the rest of your week be blessed. May you all have a great day today. And always may the peace of the Lord be with you.